Hello everyone, you're all very welcome back to our Advent series on EWTN. My own name is Father Adrian Farelly. I'm a Dominican priest and I'm stationed here in Uri with the Dominican community in St. Catherine of Siena's church here in Uri, and we're near the Mourne Mountains and beside the sea here in the north of Ireland. I'm sure when I mention the Mourne Mountains and the sea, you might recall Don McLean singing "When the Mountains of Mourne Swept Down to the Sea." And that's where we're gathered here for our Advent series. And it's a most beautiful part of the country of Ireland. And we're happy that you're joining us here for these Advent talks. Advent is a wonderful time of the year. It's my favourite season. And because it's a season of hope, it's a season of joy, and it's a time when we're looking forward to the birth of Christ. And Advent gives us something to look forward to. On our journey through Advent, we are looking at the different elements that play an important part of our preparation for the Christmas season. This week is the third week of Advent, and it begins with the third Sunday of Advent called Gaudete Sunday. And Gaudete means rejoice, be joyful, and it calls us during Advent to rejoice, to be hopeful and to be joyful. And it's a positive time of the year as we look forward in expectation to celebrating the birth of Jesus at Christmas. So let us begin by reading the Gospel of the third Sunday of Advent. And it's St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 11, verses 2 to 11. John, in his prison, had heard what works Christ was doing, and he sent his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or have we to go to wait for someone else?" Jesus answered, "Go back and tell John what you see and hear. The blind see again, and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised to life. And the good news is proclaimed to the poor, and happy is the one who does not lose faith in me." As the messengers were leaving, Jesus began to talk to the people about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed swaying in the breeze? No. Then what did you go out to see? A man wearing fine clothes? No, those who wear fine clothes are to be found in palaces. Then what did you go out for? To see a prophet? Yes, I tell you, and much more than a prophet. He is the one of whom Scripture says, 'Look, I am going to send my messenger before you. He will prepare your way before you.' And I tell you solemnly, of all the children born of women, a greater than John the Baptist has never been seen. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is." John the Baptist is one of the prophets who call out to us during these weeks of Advent. He preaches in the wilderness, which is not a comfortable place and not a nice place to live in. And he is calling on us in the wilderness to prepare for the coming of the Messiah. Sometimes we call the wilderness a God-forsaken place. But Advent prepares us to bring God, in the name of Jesus, to those parts of our lives where there is an emptiness, where God doesn't seem to be present. In Advent, we enter into the wilderness and we look at what it feels like to be in the absence of God. Sin also drives us into the wilderness. But Jesus, who is coming, is the one who goes into the wilderness and reaches out to sinners, those who feel the absence of God in their lives. In Advent, there is a desire for us to welcome Jesus into our wilderness, the wilderness in our own lives. So in the words of John the Baptist, there is a feeling of expectation. John's is a call to hope, and hope fills the air at this time. There is something for us to look forward to, the coming of the Messiah, and the call brings joy with it. And this feeling of expectation is expressed each day in the liturgy of the third week of Advent. At the beginning of the third week of Advent, on the third Sunday, the Mass vestments are rose-coloured, representing joy, a change from the purple vestments of the other Advent weeks. And the mood is changing as we approach the third Sunday of Advent. There is hope. There is something to look forward to. We have good feelings about what is going to happen. Also, during this week of Advent, our focus is on the Advent wreath, and the third candle that we light on the Advent wreath is rose-coloured, unlike the other purple candles that we use in the other weeks during Advent. And the rose-coloured candle reflects hope and joy and rejoicing. And the purple candles of the other weeks of Advent are replaced by the pink-coloured candle or rose-coloured candle during this week. The rose-coloured candle represents hope and joy and rejoicing. And in a sense, we too are being lifted up as we advance through Advent. We are being called to be hopeful, to be joyful, to be cheerful, to be excited as we look forward to the birth of Christ. Because that's what the Christmas season is all about, celebrating the birth of Christ. So please join me again in a few moments, and we will continue our reflection on Advent. Hello everyone, you're all very welcome back as we continue on our reflections during the weeks of Advent. My own name is Father Adrian Farelly, and we're gathered here at the Dominican Church here in Uri, in this beautiful church dedicated to St. Catherine of Siena. Before we continue on our theme for today, I'd like to draw your attention to one part of the season of Advent that appeals to me. And during the third week of Advent, the liturgy goes into a higher phase when we have what we call the O antiphons. And the element of excitement enters into the liturgy and calls on us to be uplifted. And so we have the O antiphons. And the O antiphons are used as an introduction to the Magnificat that's said at evening prayer or Vespers each day, and in the Gospel acclamations during the days leading up to Christmas Day. And the antiphons are from the 17th to the 23rd of December. And the antiphons are titles given to the Messiah, to the one who is to come. And the antiphons are, O wisdom, O Lord, O root of Jesse, O key of David, O morning star, O King of the nations, O Emmanuel. And the part that I like in the antiphons is the letter O. And the O expresses how we are feeling. It's a sound coming from deep within the body, the letter O. It's not just a word, but it's an expression of a feeling. And it expresses the deep feeling of joy and excitement as we get closer to the birth of Jesus. But more than that, the O expresses how we should feel in our daily lives as Christians, because Christ is with us every day and we are never alone. And that excitement is expressed in the letter O in those antiphons. As Christians, we should feel excited, we should feel enthusiastic, we should feel full of joy. If people could only see that joy in our faces. One person in Advent too is Mary, the mother of Jesus, and she's at the centre of Advent. And Mary is remembered for her great prayer in the Magnificat, the prayer where she praises and thanks God for all the joys and blessings and graces that she has received in her earthly life. And Mary's prayer is one of thanksgiving and a reminder to us that our prayer should also have praise and thanksgiving as we approach the season of Christmas. Our prayer should always reflect the joy that is within us. And now we continue with the theme of our reflection today. And I was talking earlier about the importance of joy and hope in our lives during the season of Advent. And I'm reminded also of that when I'm celebrating the sacrament of baptism. During baptism, the one being baptized is blessed by holy oils, which are blessed by the bishop on Holy Thursday during the Chrism Mass. And one of the blessings is with the oil of chrism. I have some oil of chrism here. And this oil is like the other oils, but there's an extra ingredient added to the oil. And that extra ingredient in the oil of chrism is perfume. And perfume reminds us that the Christian life should be a joyful life. It should be happy. In the way we used perfume and aftershave to make us feel more cheerful. And the oil of chrism reminds us that the Christian life should be joyful and it should make us happy. We should be happy to be Christians. St. Paul, in one of his letters to the Philippians, which is often used during Advent, said, "I want you to be happy, always happy in the Lord." And that's a line that I used when I was ordained. I used it on my ordination card because it's so important to be happy and to be happy in the Lord. I want you to be happy, always happy in the Lord. And this week during Advent, this third week of Advent, we are emphasizing the role of joy and happiness in the Christian life. And Advent draws upon us to reflect on what will lead us to happiness. Advent calls on us to prepare, to be joyful as we await the celebration of Christ's coming. And happiness is the one thing that we're all looking for. Our great goal in life is happiness, and our greatest goal is happiness in the kingdom of heaven, eternal happiness. Think of what eternal happiness is like. Our Christian faith is the one thing that will lead us to such happiness, happiness in the Lord. And the birth of Jesus is the beginning of his life on earth, the beginning of the way to find happiness in the Lord. And our Christian faith should make us joyful and happy and positive and filled with joy and happy in the Lord. As Christians, we're called to be positive, to have hope, to be joyful, to be happy even when life is not easy. Our happiness is in the Lord. I remember a story of Saint Bernadette of Lourdes, when the nuns asked Bernadette if she would like them to go and pray for her at the grotto in Lourdes so that she would recover from her illness. But she said, "Oh no," she said, "I'm happier on my bed of suffering than a queen on her throne." So that happiness in the Lord will carry us through all situations that we find ourselves in, because the Lord is with us, and that's the important thing. And because we have Jesus born in Bethlehem with us in our hearts, and that knowledge fills us with joy. So during Advent, we hear different voices calling on us to welcome the coming of the Messiah. And we have the prophets who are a part of our preparation for Christmas time, the prophets of the Old Testament, and we have the gospel stories such as the Annunciation and the Visitation is speaking to us. And during Advent, I'm also very aware of the Magi, who during the first Advent were travelling on their journey to witness the birth of the Messiah. And when they arrived at Bethlehem at the Epiphany, they found Jesus revealed to the whole world in the manifestation. But during the first Advent, the Magi were on their journey and they were following the star which guided them to see the birth of the Messiah. But the Magi could only see the star at night. They could only travel during the darkness of the night, and it was a time when it was not safe to travel. People tend to avoid the darkness, to avoid the night time. There can be danger in the darkness, and we can find ourselves in the darkness of our own lives when we feel lost, when we feel empty. And Advent tells us not to be afraid of the darkness, but always to have hope in our hearts. Often it's in the darkness that we find Christ and experience his presence. This third week of Advent tells us not to lose hope if we find ourselves in dark places. Sometimes part of our journey is to face the darkness, not to be afraid of the darkness. But in Advent, we are reminded to look for the star which guided the Magi, that which will give us hope and tells us not to be afraid, that there is light ahead, and that we will not be abandoned by God, but that God will always be there with us in the darkness. What reminds me of what I have been saying is that we meet people who feel they're in the darkness, people who don't have any hope. It reminds me of the first Christmas when Mary and Joseph came to Bethlehem. There was nowhere for them to stay. There was no room at the inn. But Jesus was born in probably what was the poorest place in Bethlehem. And it reminds us that Jesus comes to us when we are in pain, when we are in the darkness, but that Jesus is there. And that hope should give us joy and should give us encouragement. So I'd like to thank you all for being with us here today and during this third week of Advent. Next week will be the final week of our Advent reflections, and it will be given by Father David Barons, my good friend and fellow Dominican, who will be with us. And I hope you will all join us next week for our Advent reflection here in Newry, in Northern Ireland, in the Dominican Church. Thank you.
Amen.